Today, on a special edition of Bearing Scars.
I found out when my son was a 17-year-old in high school, his senior year of high school, that I had inadvertently, of course, but nonetheless, I had become my son's drug dealer.
Inside and out, everyone you know has got 'em. Your mom and dad and all your friends. Enjoy your scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
Sports headlines this week, and even beyond sports headlines, have been about how painkillers have derailed the comeback dream of one of America's most beloved athletes. But it isn't just on the highest level of sports where painkillers can derail. It's in the heartland of America. It's even in your youth sports leagues. All across America, every single day, sports fields are filled with children having fun, competing, and learning lessons about life. There's also a whole bunch of parents on the sidelines. We know those kinds of parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends. There's different kinds in every single sideline. We've got the one who's a really loud cheerleader. We've got the one who's disinterested. We've got the one who consistently takes videos of every single play. The one who yells at the coaches. We've got the one who always seems to have every conceivable medical accoutrement in her purse, always at the ready. But on this episode of Bearing Scars, we're going to look at one specific parent on the sideline, the encouraging and loving mother who loves her children, wants just the best for them, but who's accidentally become one of her children's drug dealer. Today, we're meeting Jennifer Chase. She's a typical suburban mom in Idaho, the heartland of America. Her own addiction, however, led to unintended and disastrous consequences for her family. Today, we're going to learn together how Jennifer Chase went from soccer mom to addict to accidental dealer and somehow kept herself and her family all together. Jennifer Chase, welcome to Bearing Scars.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
We are excited to have you as a guest because you have a very unique perspective, as we talked about in your bio ahead of time, on addiction and on recovery, because your addiction is a totally different one than so many people have been made aware of until somewhat recently. We're going to talk about that as we continue on. But every single episode, we start the exact same way. We ask every single one of our guests, what did you want to be when you grew up?
This is an interesting question for me because I think when I was younger, contemplating that question, I wanted to be what my dad wanted me to be. And my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. And so I think my whole childhood was focused on how I was going to be a lawyer, my studies and all of that. And the truth is, after I started thinking for myself and kind of started contemplating what I really wanted to be, even before I fell into this thing called addiction, I wanted to help people that struggled with addiction.
Was your dad a lawyer? Is that why he wanted you to go into the law?
He wasn't. My dad was a pretty successful businessman, but I think he early on caught on to me being able to communicate well with even adults at that age. And so he thought that law would be a good direction for me.
And you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have an older sister and an older brother, so I'm the baby of the group.
Either of them lawyers?
Neither, no. No. I have a sister that is, her education is in social work, but actually ended up to be a realtor. And my brother owns his own roofing business.
How's Dad feel about all this? About none of y'all getting into the law?
Yeah, I think my dad passed away in 2015 from alcoholism, but I think before he passed away, he had kind of become resigned to that his kids were going to follow their own path.
Right. So you wanted to be like helping people as a kid. Yeah. With that, you're in 10th grade. What are your cliques? What cliques are you in?
You know, in the 10th grade, by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I had been to 7 different schools since I, started elementary school and through junior high and high school. So The cliques that I wanted to be involved in high school were the ones that I felt like I belonged. I just desperately wanted to connect with other individuals. I definitely wanted to feel like I was likable and enough. And because I had been to so many different schools growing up, I became really proficient at like sort of putting on a mask and being whoever you needed me to be.
Right.
I would say fairly the popular group. Some of them were athletes. We started dabbling in drinking and certainly were, involved in all the school activities. And I had a good time. I just wasn't very authentic while I did it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. How was your home life?
Well, that's a loaded question, for sure. Just to give you a little background, I am a daughter of an alcoholic. I am a a granddaughter of an alcoholic, a great-great-granddaughter of an alcoholic. My family, if you will, danced in the disease of addiction. I have a grandma that was an opiate addict in the 50s before that was kind of a thing to be. And additionally, I'm part of a statistic that says 1 out of every 4. The statistic is actually changing to 1 out of every 3, which is unfortunate. But 1 out of every 6 little boy and 1 out of every 3 little girl is being sexually abused when they're growing up in a dynamic like that. And unfortunately, I was being sexually abused by my mom's dad. And so when you talk about my childhood, there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chaos. I grew up in a fairly upper middle class home. And so I had a lot of opportunities that I was afforded, right? I was able to see a lot of things and do a lot of things. But inside of the walls of my home was an incredibly unsafe, unregulated nervous system, if you will, trying to make sense of all of the different things that were going on in my little world.
And how did you cope with that?
I think originally I acted out. I wanted somebody, an adult in my life to like validate that what I was feeling felt crazy. But unfortunately, that never really happened. And so I leaned into isolation. I remember when I was 4, the first memory that I have, we were living in Portland at the time, and I barricaded my bedroom with like all of my stuffed animals and my record player and all the things in my room. I barricaded them up against my wall because that was when I started to realize that isolation was the safest place for me. So I spent a tremendous amount of time by myself. My siblings really connected with one another, but I always felt like the odd man out. My dad, who was my person, like the one person on this earth that I knew loved me and had my back, like I said, was an alcoholic. And so that relationship was inconsistent at best. I never quite knew what I was going to get when he walked in the doors. And my mom, if my dad was my person, my mom has not been my person in my life. And so my mom and I have just never communicated the same, right? We never understood each other on an emotional level. And so that relationship growing up wasn't particularly safe either. And so being by myself was what I decided was the safest thing for me to do.
One of the things that I've noticed in almost all of our guests is that sense of isolation. Although with you, it does seem like it's in your DNA.
For sure. And I think, growing up, I knew that. I don't have a memory where I wasn't aware that this thing was probably in my DNA. Mm-hmm. Like, I wouldn't have been able to tell you the question of what were you going to be when you get older. Like, I didn't really think about that. But what I did know was without a doubt, I was not going to be like the people in my family that were not courageous enough to stop using substance. Like, I believed I had more courage in my pinky finger than they did in their whole bodies. And that was never, ever going to be me, right? Because I was so aware of that biology. And, even being aware of it the way that I was, unfortunately, it still found a way into my life.
Was your mom an addict in any way? Because it's interesting that your father was the one that you connected with, and then you later on became an addict. Was your mom an addict in any fashion, or how did she handle your father's alcoholism?
Yeah, looking back at it, I think my mom was more of an enabler in my childhood, but my mother has also always drank. She, unlike my dad, seems to be able to kind of stop when those consequences or, those things start happening to her in her life, where my dad and I weren't able to just stop. So she for sure has the biology. Both her mom and her dad were addicts. I think that she just fell more into the rescuing and enabling role when it comes to my dad's addiction.
Kind of a tough life for her.
My mother has had a very tough life. And even though she and I seem to pass in the night sometimes, I can recognize that my mom did the very best that she could with what she had been given, right? Mm-hmm. She was also abused by my grandfather and had an incredibly challenging, to say the least, childhood. And so I do believe my mom has done the very best that she could.
Did your parents know about your grandfather and the abuse? I mean, if you're a child, it's rape. So, I mean, did they know about this?
This is a sticky subject for us. I was able to tell both of my parents as an adult, as a full-grown adult, what had happened to me, and both of them denied knowing. My mom was abused, and so that's always been a sticky point for me, because I do believe that in her core, she potentially had some inkling of what was going on in my childhood. But I think so many things paralyzed her from being able to be an advocate in that space for me. Mm-hmm. But there were things going on in my home as a child that if I shared them with you, which I'm not going to, but if I had shared them with you, you would have said, that is wild behavior. Why would, your parents ever allow you to be put in that position? But I think because it was normalized in my mom's childhood, it didn't feel out of bounds. And so therefore, some, pretty difficult things happened.
What made you happy as a kid? It's an awkward pause, isn't it?
Yeah, nobody's ever asked me that question. So it's a great question. I'm not sure anything made me happy as a kid. And if it did, it was something that was giving me external validation of my worth. Mm-hmm. Because I certainly didn't feel it inside of me. So I'm a pretty good musician, and at a very early age was pretty gifted in playing the flute, and had some opportunities that other people my age didn't have. And I remember that external validation of me being good made me happy. But I can't think of any times where I was like authentically felt joy, where I authentically was happy from a gut level.
Wow. I'm sorry about that. We're gonna go somewhat happy right now. At least you didn't play the tuba. Can you imagine lugging the tuba to middle school instead of just carrying the cute flute? You got this tuba or the French horn or something like that. So good decision.
I had a friend that played the trombone, and we would carpool sometimes to school, and she just had this ginormous instrument that she had to carry with her all the time.
You left high school. You went to college. Which college did you go to? What'd you major in? And were you happy there?
Yeah, this is a great story. So when I went to my dad and said I wasn't going to go into the law, he said, fine, I'll pay for your school, but you have to go somewhere in state. And so I literally pulled out an atlas, a big book of maps for the aging me, I know, and pulled out a ruler, and I figured out where I could distance-wise go the farthest away from my family. I chose the University of Idaho, which is about 5.5 hours from where I live, and probably about a 20-hour drive from where my dad lives. Oh, by the way, I majored in music, which, yes, I loved that. I absolutely found a lot of joy in music in itself. It brought out an emotional, it brought something emotional in me that I missed from the rest of the world, if you will, if that makes sense. But college was the first time where University of Idaho is a pretty big party school, and I was part of the Greek system, and so we definitely were partaking in alcohol. But because I was never going to repeat this cycle, that I was going to be the one in my family that broke the chains, I was still hyper aware. And so, alcoholics drink 7 days a week. I was only going to drink 3 days a week because, that would be safe.
You're so much smarter than your DNA. I got this.
Yes, I'm going to outsmart my DNA, right? But the thing that started happening in college is that I started to put a connection together that if I drink more, I will feel differently. So if I drink more, this boy will like me. If I drink more, I will be funnier. If I drink more, I will be less anxious. And so I really started putting a connection to feeling and substance. And I didn't know what to do with it at that moment, right? But I at least started to make that connection. Yeah.
You're getting A's, B's, C's. You're doing okay in school. I don't know how you can get a D in music, but I mean, I'm sure there is some way.
Yeah, I did. At
how
the
do
end
you
of
do
it,
this?
for sure.
How do you get a D in music?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Actually, studying music and music theory and all of that can actually be pretty challenging. Mm-hmm. I did really well at the beginning and then just, ever so slightly started to suffer or to struggle and ended up actually flunking out.
Why was it a challenge to finish school?
I think because of the expectations that I don't know how you are. But for me, when somebody tells me how to do something, I repel from that.
Yeah.
Right? When somebody tells me what I should be doing, I think, I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to do it a different way. And I think the expectations that I felt, whether they were accurate or not, whether those expectations were actually placed on me or not, that's how I felt. And I think that just caused a lot of conflict internally as I was finishing school.
You get out of college. What's your first grown-up job?
My first grown-up job was working in a daycare. I flunked out of school, came home, did all of those things, and then met a man. We ended up getting pregnant. I found out that I was pregnant at the time with twin little girls. I actually lost one of them. But my full priority in life, was to raise this little girl and for her not to have the experiences that I had growing up. It was the only thing important to me, was that she wasn't raised in a home where there was an addiction. There wasn't any sexual abuse happening. I had to do this differently than what was given to me as in my childhood. And so that was really my focus. And so after I had her, I went to work at a daycare because I wanted to be with her. I wanted, this life of hers to look differently than mine had. And so for the first year and a half of her life, after being newly married, we decided for me to work in a daycare. And then about a year and a half after she was born is when I really started my training to become a certified drug and alcohol counselor. And that then was my next job of working in the treatment field with both adolescents and adults.
It sounds like you worked so hard because of your childhood to give your kids a clean, safe, harmonious childhood. Do you think you did? Oh,
heavens, no. I think that's, part of the shame that I've had to work through as a recovering addict is, that was the only thing that was important, literally the only thing that was important to me. And I not only didn't break the chains, but, as you'll hear, I actually added a link when it comes to my son. And so, what I found was that I was so underprotected or felt so underprotected as a child that I swung that pendulum so far over to the other direction that I protected my kids from anything hard. And so they never learned any coping skills of how to deal with life on life's terms because I protected them from that. But then additionally, the impact that my addiction had on them, I did the very opposite of protecting them from what I had walked through as a child.
While you were dealing with that, did you know that you weren't providing them that ideal childhood that you were hoping you would provide them, or were you just helicoptering and because of that thinking that you were doing a phenomenal job?
I think that the most important thing is that I believed with everything in me that I had done it. I had broke the chains, right? In that period of my life, I had had 2 babies. I was a stay-at-home mom at that point. I was, going to school and doing some of that. But for the most part, I was with them. And there was no substance use in my house. There was occasional alcohol, but I was in an incredibly loving relationship with my husband. And I believed in that time of my life that I had broken the chains. And I believed so much that one evening I called both of my parents and told them, end quote, that I had more courage in my pinky fingers than they did in their whole body.
How old were you at this point?
I was, I think, probably about 26.
26 years old. You thought you had the world by the string. Yep. You'd gone to school. You would overcome in your eyes and in your heart your childhood. You were providing for your children a fantastic or a somewhat as much of an ideal childhood as you could give them. However, just around the corner, there was going to be something that derailed this ideal life that you thought you had made. And when we come back to Bearing Scars, Jennifer's going to tell us about how a visit to the hospital caused her to become an addict too. We'll be right back. Today's episode of Bearing Scars is sponsored by the Churchill Strategy Group. In today's complex world, your voice needs to be heard, from City Hall to the halls of the White House. Whether you're navigating local regulations, state policy, or federal legislation, Churchill Strategy Group's strategic insight opens doors, builds coalitions, and turns challenges into victories. Visit them online at churchillstrategygroup.com.
Scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
Welcome back to Bearing Scars. We're here with Jennifer Chase, who is an addiction counselor in Idaho, and she has a unique perspective on addiction counseling because it's in her DNA. There's generations of addiction in her family. But at the age of 27, 28, 29, she thought she had it beat. She called her parents, let them know, you know what, Mom, Dad, I got this. I just broke the cycle. And then something happened. What happened?
It was a Friday afternoon, and I was struggling with a headache, which I had struggled with pretty much my whole life. I had had migraines and headaches just in general. So my husband took me to the hospital, and they gave me a shot, and I came home, and he went to a friend's house with the kids, and I stayed home. And to make a long story short, the phone rang, the dog woke up, the dog needed to go out to go to the bathroom. And when I stood up, it felt like something was not typical. Something was not right. And so my husband came home, went back to the hospital, and they did a scan. And unfortunately, that evening, I was diagnosed with a hemorrhaging brain tumor and given about 12 hours to live.
Oh, wow. How does that impact Rob and yours relationship? Do you say your goodbyes? Are you awake enough to say your goodbyes at this point?
Yeah, it was crazy because about, a couple of years before that, my husband's best friend had died from brain cancer and had a tumor. And so that news that I had a tumor, although mine was benign, it brought up some trauma, if you will, from that experience, losing his friend. And I think if you've ever experienced something like this, like you just go into survival mode. It's immediately I'm rushed to another hospital because the one I'm at doesn't do sort of neurology and certainly not brain surgery. And so rushed to another hospital, and they get you, all settled in. They get you to the ICU, and in the ICU is where, you start having to sign things like do not resuscitate orders at the age of 29. I had to make a phone call to my children and tell them goodbye without them knowing what I was doing, right?
How old were they?
My kids at the time were 3 and 6.
Wow.
My tumor was in my cerebellum. And so that time in the ICU, I started to not be able to write very well. And my motor skills were depleting as time was going on. And I think I was in such shock that this was happening that I don't remember a time where my husband and I really came together and had a vulnerable conversation about how we were feeling. I think we were just both trying to get to this surgery that was going to save my life, hopefully. And so I don't know, other than originally when he looked at me, and his friend was named Jeff, and he looked at me and he said, "You are not Jeff. You are going to survive this." And so I can only imagine the impact that he was walking through at that time.
How long were you in the hospital?
A week. Amazingly, they went in, they took the brain tumor out, and I was there for about a week, and was able to come home.
And you came home with a bag full of the clothes that you wore to the hospital, but they also gave you a bag full of medication, didn't they?
They sure did. Yep. And the what I was told at the time was that you're going to, be uncomfortable for a couple of weeks, but you're never going to have a headache again. Like, this is going to, quote, cure the headaches that you have had. So I was told that this tumor that I had was genetic. And so it's funny, my grandma that I was telling you about, that was an opiate addict in the 50s, she also had this brain tumor that I got from her, and has rheumatoid arthritis, which I also have. And so I'm kind of a carbon copy of my grandmother. But so it was hereditary, and, it's removed now. You are not going to have any more headaches. And so that initial few weeks, I was for sure taking medication. And then soon after that, my husband actually tore his ACL, and he had knee surgery and didn't like the meds. So I just took him off his hands. And then shortly after that, I actually tore my ACL again. And so I went into knee surgery. And so that was about a 2-month period of time of brain surgery and 2 knee surgeries. And I can tell you, if I'm being honest, that I was addicted to opiates by the end of that second knee surgery. And I share this with people that maybe don't understand. Maybe you have an addicted loved one and you don't understand what it's like to be in the brain of an addict. But I share this with people. I remember I had been out of the hospital. So I was in the hospital a week, and then I had been out of the hospital about a week. And I'm in my bed taking my medication as prescribed, but I'm high. And I can hear my husband and my children playing in the living room. We were one of those houses where we threw balls and had fun and, did all the things inside the house, and they were playing a game. And I said out loud, as though there were another 10 or 15 people in that room with me, "Where the hell has this been my whole life?"
Wow.
Like, in that moment, I was finally okay. I could finally take a deep breath. I could finally felt like I could fit in my skin. I didn't care that I had been sexually abused, or that my parents didn't protect me, or that my dad was an alcoholic, or that my siblings didn't like me. I didn't care that 2 weeks before that I had to say goodbye to my children and thought that I was going to die. Like, in that moment, I finally, after 29 years, felt like I was going to be okay. I felt like what I thought everybody else felt like. Like, I had felt like growing up that everybody had been given a manual when they were born, and they were like, "Sorry, sweet baby girl, we're out of print." Right. And I was trying to figure this thing out on my own. And finally, in that moment, I felt like somebody had given me this manual, and I was going to be okay.
When you were feeling this immense joy, did you know that it was a drug-induced joy, or did you just assume that it was a tumor's gone, this is how life is joy?
It's an interesting question. Probably, I don't know that I had enough life experience in that moment to, in hindsight, be able to know that it was the medication or the drugs. I just knew this, like, it was the solution. And again, if you're out there listening and you have a child that's an addict, or you just desperately want to understand what it feels like to be in my brain, substance was never the problem. Substance has always been the solution to the problem. And if you ask any addict in the world, they would agree with you, right? And everybody's problem can be different. Obviously, mine is pretty capital T trauma, if you will. But But everybody has an experience if they use substance that led them to substance being the solution.
Mm-hmm. And what was in that bag of drugs that they gave you at the hospital and that you picked up at your local Walgreens or CVS afterwards?
Well, at the first, it was just like hydrocodone. Mm-hmm. About 3 months after surgery, I started getting headaches again, and nobody could figure out what was happening. I've gone to the Mayo Clinic. I've seen some really amazing doctors, and nobody could figure out why I was continuing to have these headaches. And so because there was this legitimate medical situation that I was having, and I was already addicted to substance, and then the doctors not knowing how to fix it. And this was in the early 2000s when the opioid epidemic was really ramping up in the United States. Mm-hmm. Because doctors couldn't figure out how to fix it, they kept just prescribing me pain medication. And the amount of medication that I was being prescribed is mind-blowing.
What was the dosage?
So I had 240 hydrocodone pills for a month and 240 Dilaudid pills for a month. Then I was given 6 Dilaudid shots that I could take throughout a month. Then I was given fentanyl patches. And then I had a standing order, an understanding between my pain doctor and the hospital that I could go to the hospital 4 times a month for a Dilaudid IV.
And are these all being prescribed from the same circle of care, or did you find yourself doctor shopping in the beginning, or did you end up doctor shopping afterwards?
I didn't doctor shop. I wished I had been able to be honest, but pharmacy boards and the pharmacy could see who was prescribing and how much and all of those things. And so this really, for the most part, I had 2 doctors that were in connection with one another that kind of understood and knew what I was being prescribed.
When you would overdose because you were on what was prescribed to you, so you were inadvertently overdosing, what were your symptoms that your husband and your family and your friends would see?
It's funny because my tolerance had become such that I was maintaining life on that level of medication or drugs. It wasn't the opiates that were going to cause me to get a divorce, that my children were never going to talk to me again, that I was going to end up in jail, that I was going to kill somebody driving. It wasn't the opiates. It was this additional Xanax prescription that I was being given on top of all of the opiates. And I would take Xanax. So basically what I did was I knew all of these different prescriptions were coming at a different time each month. And so let's say I'd get the hydrocodone, I would use all of that, and then I would be getting this next prescription of Dilaudid. And so I would use all of that, right? And I would do this kind of in linear spaces, if you will, throughout the month. And so when I would get Xanax, I would take the whole bottle of Xanax, which was about 60 pills, I think, in a period of a week.
Oh, boy.
And Xanax was where I quite literally almost killed a family driving one night. I quite literally almost killed my daughter driving one day. My husband was going to divorce me. My children asked me to never come to another sporting event. Xanax was really the one that was going to burn it all down for me.
One of the previous episodes, episode number 3, Bridget Lake, that's what happened to her. She was in the Navy. She was on PCP, driving in downtown Chicago, ran over a family, killed a baby, and just knocked her. Anyway, you should listen to it. You'd find it a fascinating episode.
I quite literally I was blacked out on Xanax, and by literally the last second, I woke up and I was in the wrong lane going head on to a family in a minivan, and somehow escaped that consequence.
What time of day was that?
I want to say it was probably 6 p.m.
So it wasn't like it was 2 a.m. or anything like that. It's just they're coming home from having dinner or heading out to dinner. Wow.
And they turned around and got my license plate, and the cops met me at my house, and I faked it, and my husband faked it for me, and ended up without any consequences. But I can say that as I started contemplating getting sober, that was always an event that was very in front of my memory. And I always knew that if I didn't stop, that eventually there was going to be a consequence like that.
Are you comfortable talking about the time when your daughter was in the car?
Absolutely.
Okay. You almost have an accident with your daughter in the car. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we were driving to a spa appointment, and I'm literally blacked out on Xanax, and she's pushing me, trying to get to me to wake up, and I'm not waking up. And at some point she starts hitting me, trying to get me to wake up. And at some point she called her dad and said, she won't wake up. I don't know what to do.
You were heading to like a day of beauty with your daughter. How old was she at this time?
11 or 12.
And while the car is moving, she can't wake you up. She calls your husband and says, the car is moving. Yeah. I can't wake up, Mommy. This is not going to be a day of beauty for us.
Yeah.
And what happened?
It's interesting because I have memories of this, but she's had to fill in the blanks in a lot of it because with Xanax use specifically, you lose memories. But basically we got there and I was okay, but she'll tell the story that when I got to the spa, the people at the spa sat me down, gave me water, because I couldn't even stay awake in this appointment, right? Like I was still dozing off and clearly slurring my speech. And not their fault, not to blame, but somehow I got back in the car and took my daughter home. And I think those are the memories. I do a fair amount of public speaking now, and I talk a lot with other addicts that are either in a treatment facility or going through this. And it's one of the things I share with them is I did the opposite of break a chain, right? I did the opposite of give my children a life different from the one that I had been raised as. I became every bit the addict that my dad was when he was driving us around drunk at night, and I thought I was going to die as a kid. Every bit of that is the way that I showed up in my children's lives in their childhood. And, that was a lot of shame and a lot of unburying from that shame when I decided to get sober. And something that still to this day impacts not only my children's lives, but our relationship with one another. And oftentimes I think when we start recovering from addiction, we just want everybody to get over what happened in the past. I'm a new person. The experiences are different. I'm not that person anymore. Can we just move past it? But I'm not going to lie to you. It was extraordinarily hard when I first got sober.
And you also found yourself not just breaking the chain. You continued it to the next generation. How did you do that?
This is the part of my story that is tremendously difficult to share. I found out when my son was a 17-year-old in high school, his senior year of high school, that I had inadvertently, of course, but nonetheless, I had become my son's drug dealer. He had been raised by a mom who the only coping skill she had was substance. So when life was good, she got high. When life was bad, she got high. When she was struggling emotionally, she got high. And so as he was in his early teen years, started struggling with his own mental health battles of anxiety and depression. And, he started smoking weed when he was a teenager. And I think I just played that off as it's just the generation. They're all doing it. His frontal lobe will develop and this won't be a thing. And it's, all pretty normal. But unfortunately that progressed to him becoming addicted to opiates, my opiates. And I wish with everything in me, I could tell you and the audience that was the last day that I used, but it was not. And the next 9 months or so after I found out that my son was addicted to opiates was by far the most challenging time of my life. I can say it was the beginning to the end, right? It was when the consequences of this thing finally started to outweigh the benefits, where the pain of continuing using substance started to becoming suffocating. Like I can say that is what started that ball. But I used for another 9 months after I found out that my son was addicted to my opiates.
And when he was addicted, did you find yourself hiding your opiates because you were hiding them from him for his betterment, or because you still wanted them?
I became obsessed with that. And I think both were true. I think in my heart of hearts, I wanted to help my son. I loved my son. I was the mom that didn't allow them to do anything hard because I was just going to protect them from it. And so I wanted to be that version of myself. But in the quiet moments, I did it because all of a sudden it made perfect sense as to why I was running out every month, right? It wasn't because I was overusing. It was because my child was consuming them as well. And so I think it was both, but I became obsessed, right? I had them in bags that had locks in them, and I had them in safes, and I would get them out daily, and I would count it, and I would try to make sure that he wasn't taking any, all in the name of protecting my son. But really, if I were being honest, it was trying to protect myself.
What a visual. What a visual of you hoarding your drugs from your family, and the reasoning behind it. Those final 9 months after you discovered that you had inadvertently become your son's drug dealer, how did those spiral to the point where you said, something's got to change?
Well, I think originally I came up with kind of a plan A and a plan B. And originally plan A was, how do I bow out of this thing, if you know what I mean, right? Like, I understand that as a society, we believe that suicide is an incredibly selfish thing to do, but I can only take you in that moment and tell you that I believed it was the most selfless thing that I could do. If I could just not wake up in the morning, my husband of 21 years, for all things holy, would be able to love again, like really love again. My children would mourn me and say, yeah, my mom was just a drug addict. Like, you know, it was what it was. My son would have the opportunity to heal. Like, I truly believed that it was the most loving thing that I could do if I just didn't wake up. And so for several weeks into a month, I attempted to sort of take a lot of pills, take more pills than I had taken the night before. And I joke about this. It's not really funny, but when you come from the long line of addiction that I've come from, we have fantastic livers. And, you know, every day I would wake up and hate myself more than I did the night before. Like, I couldn't even do that. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I started to explore this plan B. And plan B was, how do I stop being my son's drug dealer?
We're going to get to Jennifer's plan B and how she stopped being her son's drug dealer, stopped being her own drug dealer, and started living anew. We'll be right back.
More than half of all adults have a family history of alcoholism.
Not everyone trapped by alcohol is an alcoholic.
Families and friends are suffering too. Al-Anon and Alateen can help. Call 1-866-200-0223 or visit alanon.org/help to find a meeting near you.
Scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
Welcome back to Bearing Scars. Today we're with Jennifer Chase, and she is an extremely strong woman who has come from a long line of addicts. Thought she was the end of that line. Turned out that not only was she not the end, but she was an enabler for her own children. But she got past that, and she wants you to learn how she got past it. So if you're going through this, you can potentially get past it as well. Jennifer, how did you start moving forward?
Yeah, my son graduated from high school on May 27, 2017, and I checked myself into an inpatient facility the very next day. And the reason why that is pertinent is because when I went into the facility, it wasn't from a place of, I want to learn how to be sober. I want to learn about this thing called recovery. I want abstinence. I want, anything like that. The goal was, how do I stop using substance more? Like, how do I lower my tolerance? How do I stop being my son's drug dealer? How do I make it so that this is easier? But I did not go in with the intention of, I'm going to do life without this solution that I had found 14 years before. And I think what happened in that facility is what sort of changed my mindset. And, I was there for 28 days. And I remember at about day 5 thinking, these people are my people. Like, I yearned for connection in my life, whether it was with my siblings or my mom or a consistent connection with my dad. Like, I yearned for it. And I found in very short order while I was in that facility that I was connecting with these other human beings, like on a soul to soul level. And I wanted more of that. A facilitator had made a comment about how addicts oftentimes feel like they're victims. And I had gotten very upset and said, no, I am a victim. And a counselor pulled me in her office and she said, what's going on? And I said, I'll tell you, but this has this isn't how I'm going to use like a gentle lady, or how I'm going to get my tolerance down, or how I'm going to save my son, right? It has nothing to do with anything. And she said, what? And I said, I was sexually abused as a child. And just saying it out loud, because I had said it out loud twice, really. Well, 3 times, really. Once to my mom when I was about 18, and she had made me at least feel as I walked away as I was not telling the truth. One, I had talked to obviously my husband about it. And then the other time is when I called my parents and told them that I had, experienced this. And my goal was for them to take some responsibility in it. So I really had held this close to my chest.
Why do you think you held it so close to your chest and didn't tell anybody?
I think I observed the world as a child and realized that we don't talk about this. I have a memory when I was 4 of telling my mom that I had this funny feeling inside of me. And her response to me was, yeah, everybody has that funny feeling. And I think that was because she had experienced abuse growing up and wasn't horribly aware, but I just observed the world, and the world was not open to me sharing about my childhood experience. And so I think that I just learned that. I think, growing up, and even with my husband, where it was open to talk about, I didn't talk about it often. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just think that it just was something that I held very, very close and was very shrouded in shame for me.
Do you think that there's any irony in the fact that you did not have, and you mentioned that you did not have a clique in high school, and the only time you've talked about having your people is the clique of recovering addicts?
Yes, the irony, right? Mm-hmm. I think if you were to sit down with any addict, they would tell you that they feel like while they're using, there is this lack of connection as a whole. Mm-hmm. That's where isolation plays in, our shame plays in. And I had, like I said, had felt that way for most of my life. Even the people that I was connecting with, I felt like a false version of myself. I felt like this part that I was playing, like they didn't really know the authentic person. And it wasn't until I'm sitting in this room with all of these broken people that have burned their life down, right? Nobody was in there on a winning streak. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I met these incredibly broken, flawed individuals that I felt like they saw the authentic version of me and loved her.
Mm-hmm. When you reached recovery, and you're obviously constantly going through recovery, you're still in recovery now. All addicts are still in recovery. You ended up creating your own clique because right now, what are you doing for a living?
Yeah, it's interesting. When now I am a certified life coach that works with loved ones of addicts navigate this disease and try to find their own peace, but also contribute to the solution of their addicted loved one getting sober. For 7 years previous, however, I worked in the trenches in an outpatient program with addicts trying to get sober. And the interesting thing, as I helped build that company and was on the executive team there was just this little thing pulling me. I call him my higher power, pulling me, saying, Jennifer, you have so many different perspectives of this thing. You have the perspective as a daughter. You have the perspective as the person themselves struggling with the addiction and recovering from it. And I also have this perspective of being a mama. And I just couldn't walk away from this pull saying, you've got to, like, the addicts themselves have quite a few resources available to them, right? Like they can go to the treatment facilities and the outpatients and the AA meetings and all of those different resources. But oftentimes as loved ones, there are very few resources to help navigate and heal from this thing because we know it's a family disease.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't just help yourself. You didn't just help the addict. Now you're helping families of addicts so they can ensure that they hopefully can break the chains in their DNA as well.
Yeah, and I think selfishly, when I look at that, and you say that out loud, which I'm very proud of, but selfishly, it is me giving a living amends to my family. And, the way that I participated in the addiction family model in my own home was significant. And so it's almost like I didn't get it right when you were kids, but the way that I'm going to try to right that wrong is to try to help other families navigate this thing or heal this thing the way that I wish we would have.
How are your kids now? How are they doing?
Oh, thank you for asking. If I'm proud of anything in this world, it's that my family does continue to heal from this thing called addiction. Mm-hmm. My husband and I are going to be celebrating 30 years this August, and healing, navigating addiction in your marriage is by far one of the most challenging things I think that people can walk through. But when you're talking about my kids, I am just so deeply proud of them. And it doesn't have anything to do with what they do professionally or that they both own homes. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with that. The pride comes from that my kids are so incredibly courageous and have never walked away from the fight of healing from this thing. And, my son's addiction, like mine, is not linear. It ebbs and flows, and some days he's doing great and some days he's struggling, and some days his shame starts, coming into his life, and he's got to do that work, and challenges of being, a 27-year-old with a small child and one on the way. But he never backs down from the challenge of this. And, my daughter continues to not only show up for me in ways I couldn't imagine, but learning, like, I can really look at this and say, there are some real advantages and gratitude that I have that we walked through this as a family, and the growth that they've been able to find in their early adulthood is awe-inspiring to me.
Well, then you've done your job. As a parent, you've done your job. So you should be proud of yourself for that.
Thanks. I think it's hard for me to hear that and accept that, right? Because I want to convince you of all of the things that I did wrong. And there are lots of things that I did wrong, but to watch them now is something that if today was the last day that I had on this earth, those two have made their mama proud.
What's your grandma name?
Grammy.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Yep. And wow, that has been a whole experience. I just can't, I oftentimes look at my husband and say, I just can't even believe how much I love this.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
And I get to do it sober. She never has to know that version of me, which is such a gift.
You had, issues after you had your aneurysm and your brain surgery and stuff like that. Can you still play music?
I can, but I very rarely do.
Well, that leads into what then are your 3 resilience routines, things that keep you going when the times are down?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty concrete answer for me because, when I stopped using substance as my one and only coping skill, I have had to add a tremendous amount of coping skills into my routine in order to counteract just that one coping skill that was substance. And the 3 that are the most important to me that then I can use, depending on the day, depending on the struggle, I think they vary, but for the most part, the 3 are very consistent. And the first one is journaling. I don't think that I am where I am today without the coping skill of journaling. And I not only use it from a perspective of being able to talk to that little girl that still is inside of me that walked through some hard things, but I also can use it when we're talking about gratitude lists and, things that really help me change my mindset about the world today. The second one is meditation. And meditation has become so important to me because when I got sober, I knew that I was going to have to figure out how to deal with my chronic pain without substance. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know if I was going to be successful. That was one of the biggest reasons, fear, if you will, as to why I didn't get sober for such a long time, is I didn't know how I was going to do this thing called chronic pain. And then the third one is that I'm a runner. And, although running itself can be a numbing exercise, right? For me, it is an exercise of, it's not something that comes easily to me. I am not a runner by nature. And so me running is I'm choosing to do something hard today that's going to hopefully make me a better person. And that is the mindset that I continue to have. If something's hard, I need to be doing it. If something's challenging, I need to be doing it. If I'm fearful about something, I should probably be doing it. And running is an avenue for me to continue to try to stretch my comfortability.
So journaling is a solo exercise. Running is a solo exercise. Meditation is a solo exercise. But you have a life mate. How important in your life is your husband, Rob?
It's going to make me cry. I looked at my, this is going to make me cry. I looked at my life as though I wasn't even worthy for God, that God had kind of left me or didn't think I was worthy at a really young age when I started experiencing the sexual abuse and the challenges that I had as a child. And I believed that up until I met my soulmate. My husband and I would tell you a story of like the moment that we met, the moment we laid eyes on each other, we both had sort of a spiritual experience and knew from that moment that that was my person. And the idea that I had a person, that I was worthy of having a person, that the universe showed up for me. Maybe I am not such a bad person. Maybe I do have worth. Maybe I do have value. And my husband has always seen that value, even though for 14 years of that marriage, I was an absolute wreck and I was burning everything down around us. And if my husband were sitting here, he would share with you that he contributed to that in a way, not in the way that he was taking the substance, but contributed to the length of that, right? Because I had a medical condition and because he loved me, there was a lot of enabling going on during that time. And so even when I got sober, we did this healing together and it was messy. And there were times where we had to decide in these new versions of ourselves whether we still wanted to do this. But at the end of the day, regardless of what is going on around me, it's me and that man. And that is something that I will eternally be grateful for and am not sure that I would be half of the version that I am today without him.
Jennifer, what do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be that I tried to change the stigma of addiction in our society. I think the only way the stigma changes is when those of us that are recovering stand up and have enough courage to share the old version of ourselves. Because when I share the old version of myself, somebody knows that there's hope and that I'm not who I was when I was an addict. We need to change the stigma from a place this is a moral disease or a moral failure to asking ourselves the question, what happened in somebody's life where substance became the solution? With more empathy and compassion around it rather than judgment. And if I die tomorrow, my prayer is that somebody said she did her best.
I think you've done a good job.
Thank you.
And now, scar tissue. There's a science called paralinguistics that is interesting to research, especially in light of listening to today's episode. When we met Jennifer Chase today, we met a woman with many pitches and tones in her voice. Listen to her talk about her childhood and the tone that she has, and the pitch that she has as she discusses college and her career and the good time she had at both of them. Listen to how Jennifer discusses her addiction and how it impacted her and her family. And then listen to how she talks about her children. You can feel the light in her eyes through our ears when she talked about her children and how proud she is of both of them and everything that they've accomplished as people. And when she talked about Rob, her husband, the man who, throughout it all, has been with her, by her side, supporting her in the best way that he knew how. Listen to that pitch. There were tears. You could hear them. You could feel them. You could feel her emotion. And then, when we started talking about her legacy, her pitch and tone changed once again. That's the science of paralinguistics. In our own lives, we have our own sort of paralinguistics as well. How we talk about things that are important to us, how we talk about our career, how we talk about our past, how we talk about jokes, how we talk about fun stories, funny stories, sad stories. The tone in our voice changes every single time. But the true tone in everybody's voice, I believe, is when people are talking about what's most important to them. And for most people, like with Jennifer Chase, what's most important is family. And when you're thinking about your own family and your own legacy with your family, think about how you talk to them about what you've done in your life and what you want them to do in their life. Because your kids are looking up to you, yet they also understand that everybody, every single one of us, is bearing scars. Every single one of us has made mistakes. Jennifer's made mistakes. She's owned up to them, and she's moved forward. As you're thinking about your life, your legacy, your children, your family, what matters most to you, understand that yes, you're bearing scars, but you've survived and you've thrived. Let's keep learning together.